The dog was called Crow because of the black stripe that ran from his nose down his back, like soot smeared across a fresh snow. He rarely barked, only when something was seriously wrong. Crow had survived 2 cattle drives, 3 gunfights, and a harsh Kansas winter that cracked barns like old ribs. Wade Cridge, his master, trusted Crow more than any man he'd met since the war. They were 30 miles from the edge of Sundown County when the wind shifted west. Crow's ears twitched, and he sniffed the dry dust. Wade adjusted his heavy saddle, feeling the sunburn on his skin. He paused mid-sip from his canteen as Crow ran ahead, moving with purpose through cactus shadows and hard-packed earth. Wade clicked his tongue, urging the horse forward. They passed a rusted fence post long forgotten by any ranch, a skull caught in wire, and a boot half buried in sand. This land was made of forgotten things. Crow stopped suddenly. Wade dismounted slowly, boots sinking softly into dust still cool from morning, despite the harsh sun. Crow whined softly. There, curled in the shade of a boulder and half covered with dirt, lay a girl. She looked like she was trying to bury herself alive. Her skin was the color of wet ash, lips cracked and dry. Her hair was tangled and stained with dried blood. Her dress, once pale blue, was shredded by thorns and wind, its hem ragged like the breath of a wolf. Wade said nothing. He crouched beside her and placed the back of his hand near her mouth. There was breath, thin and dry as old paper, but breath nonetheless. Crow sat back on his haunches, eyes fixed on her. Wade lifted water to her lips. She swallowed once, then coughed, dust rising from her throat. She tried to move but failed. Her eyes fluttered but did not open. Wade lifted her into the saddle and tied her arms loosely. He mounted behind her, guiding the horse toward the foothills where a half-ruined hunting shack stood hidden behind cottonwoods, a place he hadn't visited since spring rains had broken its roof. It was better than leaving her for the buzzards. She was almost nothing, a girl hollowed out by something too heavy for her bones. Crow ran ahead, leading the way, as if he knew she belonged to something important. By dusk, the shack's door creaked on its only hinge. Wade set her down on an old cot, tore his shirt into strips for bandages, and poured whiskey onto her open wounds. She didn't wake but jerked at the sting. Wade spoke little, cleaning her limbs and picking brambles from her feet. Her ankles were torn, her ribs sharp under thin skin. Someone had hunted her, or left her for the hunted. He slept near the hearth, one eye open, rifle across his lap. Crow curled by her cot, head resting on his paws, watching her breathe. 2 days passed before she opened her eyes. They were green, not pale but deep like moss pressed into stone. She said nothing, only looked at him. He offered water. She drank silently. "Do you know where you are?" he asked. Her lips parted but no words came. "Your name?" She swallowed. "Don't know." Wade frowned. "You don't remember?" "No." A lie, or maybe not. Wade had learned long ago that a wounded woman's lies were worth listening to. "You have a mark?" he asked. She blinked, then raised her arm. On her inner wrist was a strange circular burn, neither brand nor scar, but deliberate. Wade's face showed nothing, but inside something cold and ancient stirred. He had seen that mark once, long ago, on a folded letter with his name burned into the corner. Before cattle drives, gunfights, and silence, Wade Cridge had been promised to a girl, a strange arrangement between families. She was from East Missouri. Her name was Ruth Vexley, daughter of a glass merchant with debts and dying land. Wade had never met her, only seen her miniature portrait on the back of a letter, the same ring-shaped burn branded on the wax seal, a mark her mother had used to ward off evil in old ways, not spoken of in town halls. She disappeared 2 years later, and the marriage was called off. Wade never thought of her again. The girl in the shack healed slowly. She spoke little, but watched everything. When Crow left her side to chase a snake or rabbit, she missed him. Wade saw it in the way her fingers twitched against the cot's frame. She slept with her hands curled like claws. At night, Wade heard her cry out, not words but broken sounds, perhaps names or memories she hadn't yet claimed. He didn't ask, not yet. One morning she asked, "Why did you stop?" "Crow found you." She looked at the dog. It looked back. "Why didn't you leave me?" "Didn't seem right. You've done wrong before." He met her gaze. Plenty. She nodded as if she already knew. By the sixth day, she could walk. Wade gave her his old shirt and a belt to tie it into something less ragged. She accepted it with quiet grace, as if knowing better than to ask for more. You'll need a name, he said. She looked toward the window. I like Ruth. He said nothing, just watched her and the wind flatten her hair against her cheek. Fine. Ruth it is. Crow whined. The room fell still. She turned to the dog and said, not to Wade, but to the space between them, I think I was supposed to find you. Wade didn't answer. Outside, the wind rose. Far off, a bird screamed as if it knew what she meant. A few days later, Wade caught her trying to start a fire with bare hands, striking stones with shaking fury. Her fingers blistered, face hollowed by something unnamed. Who did it? He asked. Her eyes turned glassy. They thought I was dead. Wade nodded. He'd seen that kind of mistake before, the kind that left a person walking long after their shadow gave up. He let her stay. She helped repair the roof, fetch wood, boil water. She never asked about his past. He didn't ask what she remembered. But every night, Wade watched her turn the burn mark on her wrist toward the firelight, like it was a compass pointing somewhere buried deep. Then one night, she stood at the door, Crow at her side, and said, I want to find them. Wade didn't ask who. Crow growled low. I'll need a gun, she said. Ever shot before? Wade asked. No. He stood and opened the trunk. Inside lay a revolver, his father's old Colt Navy, blackened with age. Wade handed it to her. Her hand closed around it like she'd always known its weight. In that moment, Wade understood it wasn't chance or mercy that had brought Crow to find her. It was a promise he never meant to keep, and the reckoning that came with a name burned into flesh like blood. She learned to shoot with a quiet fury, never flinching at the recoil, never smiling at the crack of bullets hitting tin. Wade set up broken bottles, rusted pots, and once even nailed a scarecrow's wing to a post as targets. She struck them all within a week. He said little, only adjusting her grip when needed and reminding her to breathe before pulling the trigger. She never thanked him. At night, she cleaned the Colt by lamplight, disassembling it piece by piece until it became as familiar as breathing. Her hands, once shaky from hunger, grew steady. Her back straightened. She began wearing Wade's old boots, too big but durable, and the coat he'd outgrown in Texas. The collar brushed her jaw like armor. Crow never left her side. They moved together now, scouting creeks and watching the skies, circling the perimeter as if expecting danger at any moment. Wade didn't ask questions, but one morning they found a rider, half buried beneath brush, face down, arms spread, a bullet hole clean through his back. The horse was gone, buzzards circling lazily above. Ruth crouched beside the corpse and lifted the man's coat. Her face changed. She reached into the inner pocket and pulled out a coin, black and flat, etched with a crude symbol, a circle over a cross, the mark of the Sundown Riders. Wade had heard of them, but never wanted to meet. They weren't outlaws nor soldiers, mostly hired killers with no flag, no home, and no rules except the one written on their coins. Silence for silver, death for gold. She stood and said, he was one of them. You remember? I remember the one who gave me to them. Wade held her stare. Who? My father. She spoke plainly, no tears, no hesitation, just cold, sharp truth. Crow growled low. The wind changed. They rode south toward Dustwhip, a town choked with salt and bones, where the Sundown Riders had last been seen. The shack behind them stood empty as a freshly cleaned grave. Ruth wore the gun on her hip now, her hair tied back with sinew thread. Her shoulders were narrow but steady. She didn't speak for hours, just watched the land roll by in silence. Wade knew that look, the one you wear when you no longer belong to the world you came from. Dustwhip rose from the earth like a scab. Half its buildings were burned out. The saloon leaned eastward, as if tired of standing. Wade rode in first, Ruth behind him, Crow at their feet. The sheriff was gone. The post office boarded up. Only the general store showed signs of life. Dim lamps, 2 horses tied outside, and a girl sweeping the porch like she knew she wasn't welcome on either side of the door. Inside, a man in a gambler's coat looked up from a stack of flour bags. Ruth brushed past Wade and placed the black coin on the counter. "Where's the man who carries these?" she asked. The gambler's eyes narrowed. "What's your stake?" "My name." The man hesitated. Wade stepped forward. "You want to keep your jaw?" "That's enough." The gambler nodded toward the back room. "Reckon you'll find a map on the wall," he said, marked in charcoal. "Third camp down the Black Ridge. They stay mobile, expecting company." Wade asked, "They expect us?" "They expect nothing," the gambler said. "They just wait." The camp wasn't hidden so much as placed where no sane person would go. The Black Ridge cut deep into the land, with sheer walls and scree slopes. Only one trail led there, flanked by dead trees and twisted iron stakes from some old mine. Ruth walked ahead, moving like she was returning home. Wade hung back, rifle ready, Crow staying between them. They spotted the first sentry at dusk. Ruth shot him through the eye. No hesitation, no tremble. The second man died in his sleep, throat slit clean. She took his knife. Wade didn't ask if she'd done it before. They reached the camp's heart by firelight. 6 men sat around the coals. 2 women, gaunt and barefoot, were chained nearby. A wagon loaded with crates sat in the shadows. One wheel cracked, the canvas stained. Ruth stepped into the circle of firelight. The men rose, confused, half reaching for their guns as she drew first. 2 fell before they fired. The others scattered. One ran toward the wagon. Wade shot him through the back. Another tried the rocks. Crow leapt and tore his leg out from under him. Only one man remained, staggering toward the fire, hands raised. Ruth aimed. He said, "Ruth!" Ruth Vexley. Her hand trembled. Wade stepped up. "You know him?" She nodded once. He was the one who said she'd be better off this way. The man's face changed. "Your father made the deal," Wade said. "I know." The man smiled crookedly. "He's rich now. Sold the land. Took his name clean off the rolls. You're dead, girl. You died 2 winters ago." She shot him in the knee. He screamed and collapsed. "I lived," she said, then shot him in the heart. They burned the camp, freed the women, and buried the dead. Ruth stood over the ashes until the sun cracked the horizon, her face unreadable. Wade said nothing. He knew revenge could quiet the past but never silence it. Still, there was peace in her shoulders he hadn't seen before. She looked at him. "I need to find him." Wade nodded. Crow barked once. "St. Ellison," Ruth said. "That's where the land records went. That's where the lies live." Wade saddled the horse. "Then we ride." The trail east was long, but she rode without fear. The bride was coming home. St. Ellison sat on the edge of civility, like a drunk at a church pew, pretending long enough to get what it wanted. It was rail lines and red sashes, polished boots with blood underneath, the kind of town that... They arrived by moonlight. Wade left the horse tied beneath the sycamores, half a mile out. Ruth walked ahead, Crow silent beside her. She wore no bonnet, no gloves. Let them see her face, Wade thought. Let them guess what she remembered. No one noticed them at first. The night was loud. Fiddles screeched. Poker girls laughed sharp like broken glass against the saloon windows. But Ruth wasn't heading there. She went straight to the courthouse. Locked, of course. She didn't hesitate. Drew the Colt and shot the lock clean off. Wade raised a brow. "Subtle," he said. She didn't answer. Inside, the air stank of mildew and old ink. Dust floated like restless spirits. Ruth moved to the ledger desk and pried open drawers until she found what she was after. The deeds. "I knew what I was looking for," she said, holding up a folded page. The paper was yellowed, but the name was fresh. Jameson Vexley. Grandeur Matthias Templeton. Buyer. Transferred 6 months after her disappearance. Sealed with a notary's emblem Wade recognized. An old family sign, burned in the war and thought extinct. She turned the page. In the margin, scrawled in a foreign hand, "Property cleared. Heir deceased." She stared until her knuckles paled, then ripped the page in half. They didn't sleep. Instead, they followed the paper trail across town. Each name led to another. Bank managers, land brokers, church officials. St. Ellison had buried the deal beneath layers of smiles and scripture. By dawn, Wade had two names scratched into his notebook: Templeton and Clive Doran, one rich, one deadly. Templeton owned the land now. Doran had facilitated the exchange. Doran ran the guards, and the guards kept women like Ruth locked in wagons, in camps, in silence. She found the brothel by scent before they saw it: perfume and pipe smoke, flesh too soft for the cold. A girl answered the door, no older than 15. "I'm looking for Clive," Ruth said. "He don't take visits," the girl replied. "Tell him it's Vexley's daughter." The girl blinked once, then vanished inside. Wade put a hand on Ruth's shoulder. She shook it off. 5 minutes later, Clive Doran appeared. Tall, teeth too white, boots too clean. His eyes took her in like she was livestock. "Vexley's daughter," he said slowly. "Didn't expect to see you standing." She didn't move. "You were meant to disappear," he added. "A quiet loss, regrettable but useful." "I remember your hands," she said. "I remember the ring iron crest, the way you held the gate open when they dragged me out." He chuckled. "Memories. A funny thing." Crow growled. Doran reached for his belt. Wade shot first, clipped his wrist. The pistol dropped. Doran screamed. Ruth stepped forward and slammed the Colt into his knee. He collapsed. She knelt beside him. "You'll take me to Templeton," she said. "Now." The mansion sat west of the tracks. High ground, long windows. Templeton had bought himself the best view of the town's sins. They dragged Doran up the walk like a sack of meat. The butler opened the door and turned pale. "Tell him," Ruth said. Doran gritted his teeth, whispered, "She's here." Minutes passed. Then the door opened wider. Matthias Templeton stood there, wearing a velvet coat with the same seal on his collar as the notary's page. His hair was white, his eyes hollow. He stared at Ruth like she was smoke rising from the past. "You were a child," he said. "It was business," she replied. "I'm not a child now." Wade stepped forward. "You sold her family's land. You signed her death." Templeton looked past them at the dog, the gun, the eyes full of fire. "I can't undo it," he said. "No," Ruth said, "but you can pay." She raised the Colt. Templeton didn't flinch. He stepped forward. "If I'd known what you'd become," he said, "I'd have killed you myself." She shot him through the eye. Doran screamed again. Wade hit him across the jaw with the rifle butt. The butler ran. Crow barked once. They left the house burning behind them. Back on the edge of town, Ruth sat beneath the sycamores, the gun across her lap, her face streaked with soot. Wade stood nearby, watching the road. "You could leave now," she said. "Go back to the land." He shook his head. She looked at him, really looked. "I think you were meant to find me. Crow found you. He led you." They didn't speak again for a long while. At dusk they headed north, back to the hills, back to the dirt that hadn't been stolen. The war wasn't over, but the ghosts were fewer now. Spring rode in on dust and thunder. Rain came hard, carving gullies through the trail north, flooding the dry rivers with red water. Ruth never blinked at the storm. She rode through it like she belonged to the bones of the world, not its skin. They camped in the ruins of a burned chapel. Stone walls blackened, crucifix fallen in two. The pews had been torn up for firewood long ago. Wade built the fire anyway, and Crow curled beneath the altar like it was a den. Ruth knelt by the ruined pulpit, fingers tracing carvings that hadn't burned, names, dates, prayers etched by people long forgotten. "You ever believe in God?" she asked. Wade tossed a log on the fire. "When I was a boy, until I learned what men can do with his name." She nodded like she'd expected the answer. "I used to pray," she said, "in the camp before I forgot the words." They didn't reply. She turned, eyes catching the fire's edge. "Do you believe in justice?" "I believe in consequence." She stood. "Then we'll go to Stonewater next." He looked up. "Why there?" "It's where the child was taken." Wade stood slowly. "What child?" She took a breath that trembled at the edges. "The first night I was dragged from my father's house, there was another girl, younger, maybe 7. They said she'd fetch more coin. She screamed until they stuffed a rag in her mouth." Wade felt something tighten in his. Ruth met his eyes. "I left her behind." Stonewater lay 5 days northeast, a mining town turned bone pit. Once rich in ore, now choked with poverty and black lung. The company guards outnumbered miners 3-1. Justice had no footing there. But Ruth wasn't looking for permission. She wore her coat tight, her gun loose. Wade kept his rifle wrapped in canvas, but his finger never strayed far from the trigger. Crow walked ahead, hackles raised, teeth bared at every man who looked too long. They found the girl in a shack on the southern rim, behind the collapsed mill. Elsie, 11 now if that, thin as a wire, eyes too old for her face. She sat on the floor stitching a sackcloth doll, fingers that had forgotten how to be a child. When Ruth stepped through the door, Elsie flinched. Ruth crouched. "I remember you," she said. "You had a ribbon, yellow." Elsie blinked. "They took it," Ruth said. "I know. Are you here to take me back?" Elsie's voice was quiet. "No." Ruth's voice dropped. "I'm here to burn it all down." The man who owned the mine was Cyrus Hobb. He lived in a brick house while everyone else slept in rot. He employed the guards, bought girls by the wagon load. The town bent around him like a rusted crown. Wade wanted to kill him outright, but Ruth had other plans. She spent the night gathering names, found an old Union man who remembered his fire, found 3 miners who'd lost daughters, sisters, wives. She fed them whiskey and asked questions no one dared voice in years. By dawn, they had 20 names. By dusk, 20 men armed with pickaxes, knives, 2 rifles, and a thirst unquenched for a decade. Ruth gave them the time, just after midnight, when guards change and dogs are fed. She didn't promise safety. She promised reckoning. The night burned blue with rage. They came in silence. No shouting, no chaos, just men who remembered what was taken. Wade took the south door. Ruth and Crow circled the stables. One miner climbed the roof with a torch and a bottle of lamp oil. The first guard died before he could draw breath. The second ran. They let him inside. Cyrus Hobb was halfway to his cellar when Ruth found him. She didn't speak, just raised the colt. He begged. She said, "Do you know how many nights I prayed for this?" He offered coin, land, silence. She said she was 7 and shot him through the throat. The fire caught faster than expected. Flames jumped from roof to rafters, catching the oil, the walls, the history. Ruth walked out with Crow at her side. Her eyes rimmed red, not from smoke, but something deeper, something clean. They left Stonewater at sunrise. Elsie asleep in Wade's saddle, Ruth walking beside the mare. No one followed. The mine burned until nothing stood. A week later, by a clearing near the river, Ruth gave Elsie a piece of leather and taught her how to cut it into ribbon. Yellow. Wade watched from a distance. He didn't speak. He knew the war it wasn't just about vengeance anymore. It was about making sure the world that killed Ruth once would never lay hands on a girl like Elsie again. Summer dragged in dry and mean, splitting the land open with heat and hornets. The rivers shrank to threads and the hills went mute. Ruth, Wade, and Elsie moved like ghosts through what was left of the country. They slept in abandoned barns, old way stations, under trees still bearing bullet holes from wars no one talked about. Elsie learned fast. She watched Ruth clean the gun, watched Wade mend boots with a patience heavy from years carried. She never cried. Not once. Not even when the fever hit her 2 days out of Grayer's Bluff. They waited it out in a root cellar, Ruth laying wet cloths across the girl's brow, whispering things Wade couldn't hear. Crow wouldn't leave the entrance, just lay flat, ears twitching as if something waited above. On the 3rd morning, Elsie sat up. "I dreamed she had wings," the girl said, "but she flew into the ground." Ruth smoothed her hair. "You won't." Wade turned from the doorway. He'd buried others, carried girls smaller than Elsie out of worse places. But this one Ruth had chosen not to lose. They reached Hollow Creek in late July, a small town mostly farmhands and gravediggers. It didn't show up on most maps. The preacher there was a one-eyed ex-smuggler who married couples for bread and buried them for whiskey. Ruth asked him for a shovel, not for a grave, for the box. They found it 2 miles north beneath a dry oak. Wade remembered burying it the year the war ended. Inside a sealed pouch, a rusted key and a letter unopened. Ruth broke the seal with her thumb. Wade stood silent while she read. She folded the paper and held it out. "I was promised to you," she said. signed in her father's hand. Wade took it, wrote it, then dropped it into the fire. "I don't want a promise made by a man who sold you," he said. Ruth looked down at her wrist, the scarred circle still pale and hard against her skin. "I don't either." In Hollow Creek, they rented a cabin that faced east. Elsie slept on a cot. Wade patched the roof. Ruth worked the fields with her sleeves rolled, the Colt tucked under her belt like a warning carved in iron. For a time, things were still. Then one night, as the rain returned after months of silence, Crow bristled at the door. Wade took his rifle. A figure stood in the dark, hat soaked, hands raised. "I ain't armed," the man said. "Name Marin. I come from south." Ruth stepped beside Wade, eyes sharp. "What do you want?" "I saw the fire at Stonewater, saw what you did, and I got girls missing in my town. 2, maybe 3, taken the same way. I figure maybe you're the kind that stops that sort of thing." Ruth said nothing for a long while, just stared. Then she nodded once. "You'll have to pay." "I don't have coin." "Then bleed beside us." The man nodded. And just like that, the war wasn't over. It was only moving. A year passed. Ruth rode less, but she trained Elsie. With flint, with powder, with eyes sharp for lies. She taught her how to track, how to disappear into the world without losing herself. Wade worked the edges of towns, whispering to widows, ex-soldiers, orphans who remembered faces in the dark. They left notes in tree hollows, signals in twine and stone. A quiet army rising from the forgotten. They called it the ash mark, for the brand on Ruth's wrist, for what was burned and could not be rebuilt. One evening, Ruth stood at the edge of the wheat field behind the cabin. The sky was blood orange, wind low. Crow sat beside her, muzzle gray now. Elsie picked flowers near the fence line. Wade leaned against the porch rail watching. "You ever wonder," Ruth said, "what might have happened if I'd stayed dead?" Wade didn't answer right away. Then, "No." She looked back. "Why not?" "Because you didn't. And everything after. That's yours." She turned toward the horizon. "Number, it's hers now." And she nodded toward the girl. Ribbon in her hair, a knife on her belt, boots dusted with soil. The wind moved like breath across the field. Ruth raised her hand. Crow followed without command. Wade stepped off the porch. Elsie smiled, small and strange, like someone who had seen both hell and the way out. The land didn't change, but the people walking it had. That was enough. That was the ending Ruth chose, and she never looked back.